Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Hartford Circus Fire, Tragedy Under the Big Top, by Michael Skidgell, narrated by P.J. Ochlan. Chapter 1. A Ticket to Tragedy. Someone went to an usher and explained my mother's fear of heights, and he came up and took her to another seat. When she got to the seat, she stood and waved to us. After the fire started, my father slid down the ropes, and Jack's father dropped us into his arms. Then he slid down the rope. Our fathers identified my mother at the armory by her wedding ring and returned home late in the night. David de Laverne. The matinee performance of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Ringling Show at Hartford's Barber Street Circus grounds on July 6, 1944, was well attended. Patrons entered the grounds from Barber Street, walking from their homes nearby or riding the city bus. Those who had saved up enough ration tickets to purchase the gasoline required for the trip drove to the site and found parking available on the lawns of local residents, a convenient way for homeowners to make a few dollars and help ease their displeasure from the commotion caused by the circus invading their neighborhood. From the street entrance, children and adults alike were tempted by a variety of concessions offered by circus vendors and sideshow attractions, including the living skeleton, the sword swallower, jugglers, the tattooed strongman, and the world's smallest people in the Midway area. Past the sideshow was the animal menagerie, where elephants, giraffes, and other corralled animals were available for everyone to see up close. White canvas walls, 15 feet tall and attached to wagons, led the way through it all to the main entrance of the Big Top, with banners posted along the path illustrating the most exotic attractions that the circus had to offer. Topless enclosures for the men's and women's toilets, in yellow canvas to distinguish them from the white sidewalls of the main tent, were installed close to the Big Top, men's to the right of the main entrance and women's to the left. No attendants were on duty at the toilet facilities, but Ringling employees checked on them periodically during the show. Between the toilet enclosures stood a grand canvas canopy marking the main entrance to the greatest show on earth. Before entering the Big Top, patrons would be required to visit the ticket wagons outside to purchase general admission tickets, pay the taxes due for free tickets, or upgrade their tickets to the $1.20 reserved seats. Tickets could also be upgraded inside. Vouchers for free tickets were handed out to area youths who helped during setup and purchasers of U.S. war bonds, while handfuls of complimentary passes had been left with shop owners around the city several days earlier in exchange for displaying posters promoting the circus in their stores. Ringling's Big Top was 200 feet wide by 450 feet long, with sidewalls that were 15 feet high. The waterproofed snow-white canvas roof of the Big Top sloped upward from the tops of the sidewalls to a towering 48 feet, the peak of which was topped with an American flag. The tent was erected over freshly mowed grass, dry from the summer heat, and dirt that had to be watered down and covered with hay and wood shavings to control the dust. Inside the massive tent, 3 rings and 2 stages were in place for the performers to show their talents, with a 25-foot-wide oval hippodrome track separating the performance area from the spectators' seats. Patrons were allowed on the hippodrome track up until the show began, at which time the ushers stationed around the tent would see that the spectators remained behind the railings in the seating areas. General admission bleacher seats, painted blue, were available at the east and west ends of the Big Top and were separated by an exit. The 4 sections of bleacher seats, enough for about 3,400 spectators, offered a spectacular view of one performance ring, but the other stages and rings were obstructed from view for those sitting in these seats. About 6,000 reserved seats, consisting of unsecured wooden folding chairs painted red, were provided along the north and south sides of the big top and were divided into 10 sections, providing a better view of all rings and stages. Exiting the tent could be done via the main entrance or by 8 other smaller exits located around the big top. Many of these alternative exits, however, were used primarily by the performers and were blocked on the outside by circus wagons. Patrons were encouraged to use other exits during the show. Nearly 7,000 spectators would fill the seats in the big top for the matinee show. The weather in Hartford on the afternoon of July 6, 1944, was sunny and hot, 88 degrees. The cloudy skies from earlier in the day had cleared for a few hours after noon, and the relative humidity was a comfortable 41%. The grounds had dried since being watered down that morning by Ringling's front-end man, but time restraints prevented him from watering them before the afternoon show. Inside the big top, conditions were sweltering. Even clad in light summer clothing, the spectators were hot and uncomfortable. Some sections of the canvas sidewall of the big top were lowered by a couple of feet to welcome the 10-mile-per-hour northerly breeze into the tent, providing random moments of relief to those inside. Mothers, children, and grandparents composed the majority of the crowd, while many of Connecticut's able-bodied men were either in the service overseas or working in one of the many war plants in the Hartford area. Among the thousands to enter the big top at the main entrance were 4 teenaged girls who went to the first seating area to the right, the southwest bleachers. The girls went to the top row of the blue bleacher seats and sat about 2 board lengths from the neighboring reserved seating section A. From their seats in the nearly full bleachers, they could look out behind them to the west through the opening where the sidewall canvas was lowered and see the animal handlers with the elephants and camels just outside the condensed menagerie area. The Barber Street lot wasn't large enough for the full menagerie top that Ringling used at most sites, so just the sidewalls were erected around the animal cages and wagons. The Big Show matinee on July 6, 1944, began just a few minutes after its scheduled 2:15 p.m. start time. Merle Evans's Big Show band at the far end of the big top, opposite the main entrance, struck up the Star-Spangled Banner. Ringmaster Fred Bradna and a parade of horses, elephants, and performers welcomed the patriotic crowd, who were excited about a rare opportunity to witness an event as spectacular as Ringling's 3-ring circus. Luxuries such as this were rare while World War II activity raged on overseas, and the war effort took priority for many of the country's manufactured goods and services. Hartford was busy doing its part for the war effort, with local businesses such as Colt's Firearms, the Royal Underwood Typewriter Company, Fuller Brush, Pratt & Whitney, Hamilton Standard, and Sikorsky employing as many capable people as they could find and adding shifts to keep up with the government's demands for their products. As the parade concluded, Ringling's prop men installed lengths of steel cage runways that connected to the animal cages in the first and third performance rings. The runways, about 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, were installed directly on top of the hippodrome track and passed through 2 of the big top's 4 exits on the long north side of the tent, leaving room for only a single file line of people to enter or exit at one time. On the outside, these runways connected to the animal wagons parked close to the north side wall. Access around the hippodrome track was extremely limited when these runways were in place, and the prop men would immediately remove them as soon as the last of Alfred Court's trained animals were herded back out to their cages on the wagons. 2 sets of 4-foot-wide wooden steps were installed over the steel animal runways to allow patrons, many just arriving, to pass over to get to their seats. Each runway had a telescoping section that was designed to allow it to easily slide over the next section, creating an opening for guests of the circus to pass through without the need for steps. Court did not favor this feature of the runway and felt that it was not safe as far as animal escapes were concerned, so the telescoping sections were secured with rope to prevent accidental opening. The opening act of the show featured a twist on traditional lion tamer acts. Dozens of showgirls in bright yellow military costumes being trained by performers in lion costumes with whips. This act segued into master animal trainer Alfred Court's exotic animals performing in rings 1 and 3. Court was contracted by Ringling to provide the animals, trainers, cages, runways, and other equipment, and Ringling's prop men were responsible for the installation and removal of the cages and runways before and after the act. Court himself was in New York City on the day of the fire, while his trainers in orange and black costumes were performing with the animals. In Ring 3, at the far end opposite the main entrance, Joseph Walsh showed trained lions, polar bears, and Great Danes, while May Kovar commanded a collection of panthers, leopards, and pumas in Ring 1 in front of the main entrance of the Big Top. Due to war-related labor shortages, Alfred Court's act had been reduced to 2 rings rather than 3, and trainer Wilson Story helped manage the big cats in Ring 1 with Kovar. As the animal acts concluded simultaneously, the trainers began to usher their animals out of the exhibition rings. As the animals were leaving the performance area, high-wire performers, the Flying Walendas, took their positions on platforms 30 feet above the ground. On one platform stood Carl Walenda, and opposite him on the platform in the north section of the Big Top were Carl's wife Helen, his older brother Herman, family friend and performer Joe Geiger, and Helen's sister Henrietta. The Walenda troupe took its position, and while waiting for Merle Evans to cue their music, the family of aerialists heard screams and saw the fire behind the southwest bleachers. They held their positions on the rigging, expecting the circus's seatmen to extinguish the fire quickly so they could proceed with their act, which was expected to conclude with a death-defying bicycle and chair balancing routine on the high wire. 2 of the 8 seatmen in the Big Top for the July 6th matinee show were detailed by Ringling's boss canvasman Leonard Aylesworth to the West End bleachers, the 2 large sections of general admission seats to the immediate left and right of the main entrance. The seatmen would typically take turns, alternating back and forth between their bleacher sections separated by the main entrance. They would help install the seats and supports when the show set up, which gave them a good knowledge of the system so they could spot a support jack that was out of place. Working his first season with the circus, seatman John Cookie Cook sat underneath the southwest bleacher seats until about 2:15 p.m., and then left the area and went to the northwest bleachers, checking the jacks along his way to the animal runway at the northwest exit. Cook's fellow seatman under the West End bleachers, William Red Cayley, a muscular former coal miner, left his post under the southwest bleachers a few minutes later and joined Cook at the northwest animal runway. Part of their job as seatmen was to watch the seating the support jacks when the prop men broke down and removed the steel animal runway that was next to the bleacher section they patrolled, and Cayley thought that Cook might be too inexperienced to handle the task. One false move by the men removing the runways and a displaced jack could violently upset the patrons seated above. Cayley advised him to go back to the southwest bleachers, but Cook stayed to assist with watching when the runways were removed. At about 2:40 p.m., Ringling usher Kenneth Chic Gwinnell first noticed the fire to his right as he was facing the reserved seats on the south side of the Big Top. The fire was about 5 feet off the ground on the canvas sidewall of the Big Top and behind the middle of the bleachers, full of seated patrons. The ground was not on fire, just a patch of the sidewall at this time. He ran to fellow usher Mike Dare Daddario, who was on the track in front of his section, the southwest bleachers. When Daddario heard Gwinnell holler to him, he saw the fire climbing the sidewall behind his section, and the two men ran under the bleachers and were joined by usher Lewis Runyon, who had been stationed at the northwest bleachers. The three ushers each grabbed one of the 4-gallon buckets of water under the seats, marked "For Fire Only," and Daddario tossed the water onto the burning sidewall canvas. Runyon tried to pull the sidewall down, but it was installed tightly to the roof canvas in this location, with the open-top men's toilet enclosure directly on the other side of this sidewall. By this time, the fire was 10 feet up the sidewall, and in the seconds it took Gwinnell to get a fourth bucket of water, the flames reached the canvas roof of the tent and began to spread. The firefighting ushers realized that this fire was not going to be stopped with the equipment at hand, and they immediately resorted to getting the patrons out of the Big Top. As the animal act in the first ring finished, May Kovar ushered her big cats into the runway. Seatmen Cayley and Cook, under the northwest bleachers watching the animals go through the runway, heard screams and what sounded like a stampede above them. Thinking an animal had gotten loose, they went out into the arena and saw the fire on the roof of the Big Top, right above the other section of bleachers that they were responsible for watching. No one else was assigned to be or allowed under the seats, employee or patron, so it was their responsibility as seatmen to patrol their areas and return any dropped items to the patrons above, and especially to watch for dropped cigarettes and any potential fire hazards. The red and silver water buckets under the seats were their essential tools, and would often be used to extinguish small flare-ups before they got out of control. All circus workers knew to keep the buckets full and to immediately refill them if they were used. In case of a fire they couldn't extinguish with just the water buckets, the seatmen were told to use a knife to cut the ropes loose and pull the sidewall canvas down to keep the roof canvas from catching. The girls in the top row of the southwest bleachers began to feel extra hot as they watched May Kovar's act conclude. They turned and saw the sidewall canvas behind them on fire, and to their left, they saw the top of the tent burning just a few feet away. Others around them in the bleachers began to notice the growing patches of flames, and hollering ensued. While some spectators chose to remain seated, the girls walked down the bleacher seats and headed toward the main entrance, where they found themselves in a large crowd of people pushing and screaming. They saw small children overcome by the crowd and lose their footing, falling under the mass of patrons moving toward the exit as a single unit. When the girls got outside, they looked back and saw the American flag start to burn. While the Hartford Fire Department had no official representation or coverage at the circus grounds during the circus's scheduled 2-day stay on Barber Street, Hartford Police Department's coverage was a matter of discussion on July 5th, when Ringling's Chief of Police John Bryce called on police headquarters. The circus relied on the protection of local police, since Bryce was not only Ringling's police chief, but also the sole member of its police department, aside from 4 old-timers whom the circus kept around as watchmen under Bryce's direction. The number of men provided was left to be determined by Hartford Police Chief Charles Hallisey, and before the matinee performance on July 6th, the two chiefs met outside the main entrance to the big show and discussed where Bryce would like the police coverage. His main priority was that Hallisey station a couple of men in the rear lot behind the Big Top around the performers' tent to protect them from miscreants, and to this request the Hartford police chief obliged, providing 10 uniformed officers on the grounds and neighboring streets at no charge to the circus. They were considered city employees doing their job. In addition to these 10 men, 3 Vice Division officers and 3 detectives were detailed to the grounds, all in plain clothes. And Chief Hallisey, Assistant Chief Thomas F. Sullivan, and the patrolman who drove them to the circus were on duty and on scene. The Wallendas saw the fire on the sidewall rise and ignite the fringe on the edge of the waterproof canvas roof, and the flames began to spread upward quickly. Carl motioned across the tent for the others in his crew to get down, and he followed them down the rope ladder and out the rear exit. May Kovar, who would be killed by one of her lions 5 years later, noticed a sheet of flame while she was in the first performance ring, sending the big cats through the northwest runway, and tried to rush the animals out. She struggled with a terrified beast that tried to run back into the ring as the fire spread above them, and also had to separate a couple of big cats that started to fight inside the runway as patrons climbed over in their effort to escape. At the other end of the big top, Joseph Walsh had 6 lions in Ring 3 when he noticed the fire and quickly rushed them out to their cages through the northeast runway, where many of the dead would soon be found. Hartford police officers James Kennefick and Henry Griffin were detailed to the back lot area of the circus grounds, at the east end of the big top and around the performers' dressing tent that was erected in the back corner of the lot. Officer J.F. Healy, scheduled to go on duty at 3 o'clock, had just seated his wife and child in Section V and was also at the east end, standing next to the bandstand and watching the show. Griffin was stepping in and out of the east entrance at the opposite end from the main entrance, keeping an alternating watch on the dressing tent and the bleachers seating areas at that end of the tent. Kennefick was standing in the exit between the southeast bleachers and the reserved seats when he noticed a commotion at the far end of the tent. People leaving their seats, and a narrow flame working its way up the sidewall behind the bleachers. Griffin heard the commotion from outside and rushed inside to see the spectators heading toward him for the exit. Kennefick and Griffin kept them calm and moving, as the flames had now reached the roof canvas and were spreading quickly. Hartford police officer Joseph Weidel was also at the east end, waiting with Officer Healy to go on duty at 3 o'clock, when he noticed the fire and immediately ran toward it. His sons were seated in Section E, about halfway between his location and the fire, and he wanted to make sure they got out safely. Weidel found his boys, led them out, and returned to the east end to help, but the heat was too intense for him to enter. Officer George Sanford, off duty, was also at the east end with Weidel and Healy, wielding an 8mm movie camera to film the performing animals. After the show began, Ringling General Manager George W. Smith left the big top via the main entrance to check on things at the ticket wagon. He returned a few minutes later, saw the animals coming out of the runway, and then noticed people crawling out from under the sidewall and thought perhaps an animal was loose. Smith hurried toward the main entrance and saw the canvas roof above the entrance in flames and the nearby elephants roaring and starting to stampede. He gathered the elephant handlers and instructed them to lead the massive animals toward Barber Street, away from the fire, before they became uncontrollable. Although Smith was on leave from the circus during the 1942 Cleveland fire, he knew that panicked beasts would only make the current situation worse. Hartford Police Department's traffic patrolmen were keeping Barber Street clear in front of the circus grounds and helping people cross. Patrolman Anton Holst, standing across the street, looked over and saw the fire at the southwest corner of the big top, above the men's toilet enclosure. Holst ran into a house, grabbed the phone, and was calling the fire department when Sergeant Spellman arrived and completed the call. Spellman had just left the company of Chief Hallisey at the main entrance to the big top and was about 50 feet outside when he noticed the flash of flame on the roof of the tent. Knowing there were no telephones on the grounds, he ran to the White House across Barber Street to call in the emergency. Chief Hallisey and his assistant, Sullivan, arrived at the circus grounds about 2:30 p.m., driven onto the grounds in a patrol car that stopped at a circus wagon to the left of the main entrance. The Hartford Police Department chiefs entered the Big Top, went through the crowd-control gates and railings, and stood just inside the entrance to the left, near a ticket exchange station. They stopped to discuss the police details with Ringling's Police Chief Bryce and Hartford's Sergeant Francis Spellman, and then Spellman left the area to check on his men stationed on the grounds. Inside the main entrance, Sullivan heard cries of fire from the southwest bleacher section and turned to Bryce and Hallisey, who had also heard the screams. They all saw the flame on the upper part of the sidewall behind the bleachers, not quite at the edge of the roof yet. Bryce bolted out of the tent to alert the circus folks, while Sullivan told Hallisey he'd hurry to the cruiser on Barber Street to call in an alarm. Sullivan ran into Spellman along the way on the same mission and advised him to proceed while the assistant chief went back into the main entrance area. In preparation for the crowd that would be rushing the main entrance at any moment, Sullivan and Hallisey helped the circus workers clear out the pipes, ropes, and canvas that obstructed the path out of the tent. Circus men cut the ropes and lowered the sidewall canvas in an effort to keep the fire from spreading. Connecticut's Commissioner of State Police Edward J. Hickey, who also held the position of State Fire Marshal, was in attendance at the circus, sitting in the top row of reserved seating Section G to the right side of the Big Top when walking in the main entrance. Hickey heard the cries of fire after watching the animal act, and looking to his left, he saw the flames on the sidewall behind the southwest bleachers and observed for a minute, watching to see if circus employees would put the fire out. When the flames reached the edge of the roof canvas, the small fire increased in size and began to travel rapidly upward. A breeze fed the fire, and suddenly sheets of flame shot toward the northeast and northwest corners of the Big Top. Spectators began to panic at this point and scrambled to get out of the tent. Ushers waved their arms and tried to calm the crowd while leading them out quickly, and the band played on, masking the screams. Section G had cleared out before Hickey decided it was time to get his group out of the burning tent. Unsecured to the platforms, the red seats in his and the other reserved sections were in heaps and blocking the aisles down to the hippodrome track. Commissioner Hickey walked along the top row of seats until he found a clear way to get down with the children from his group who hadn't already jumped from the top of the bleachers. With the patrons leaving the southeast section of the tent without much difficulty, the attention of Officers Griffin and Kennefick was drawn across the tent to the northeast section, where they noticed a huddle of people struggling to get over the steel animal runway that was blocking not only the hippodrome track, but also a good portion of the exit in that corner of the Big Top. The stairway over the runway was jammed, and people were trying to climb over the steel bars. As the flames overhead bore down on them, the officers began helping people over, tossing children, and helping pry loose the feet that got stuck between the bars. While Officer Healy was trying to pull the runway sections apart, Griffin and Kennefick tried to help, but it was no use. They continued their efforts to pull people over the runway. Once the flames reached the center pole of the Big Top, the entire north section of roof seemed to explode at once, forcing the officers to flee the tent seconds before it collapsed on those who remained inside. When Hartford's Chief Hallisey saw people were exiting the main entrance without problem, he left the area to find a telephone. He settled for the radio in a police cruiser that was parked on the site, and while speaking with police headquarters, Connecticut's Commissioner of State Police Edward J. Hickey approached, having just escaped the burning tent with his nieces and nephews. Hallisey gave his and the Commissioner's orders to headquarters and returned to the circus grounds. By the time he arrived at the northeast corner, where one of the animal runways was located, there was a pile of burned bodies waiting for him. Hallisey had worked.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?